Welcome to the Adventures with Grammy podcast. I am your host, Carolyn Berry. This podcast is for grandparents on the go with their grandchildren and for parents who want to ensure loving relationships across the generations. I welcome your input and your feedback on every episode of the podcast we produce. Please send me an email at carolyn@adventureswithgrammy.com or connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Grammy Adventure. Please follow or subscribe to my podcast. It's free, so you won't miss an episode, and ask your family and friends to do the same. You can subscribe to the monthly newsletter by visiting my website, adventureswithgrammy.com, and clicking the newsletter sign-up link. Episode 12 of the Adventures with Grammy podcast takes listeners to museums around the world. The first stop is the Louvre in Paris, where we will meet Les Cinq Eiffel, the 5 Eiffels. These fanciful characters experience exciting adventures after the Louvre closes for the day and the Eiffels come to life. Our second guest will give us tips on how to take children to museums and turn the trips into exciting learning adventures. Our first guest is author-illustrator Liliana Leone. She has written and illustrated the series of books Les Cinq Eiffel, the 5 Eiffels. I love your books. It's a magical adventure, a magical ride to learn about art and language and geography and history. How did this series come about?
It's a little funny how it came about. In 2013, I had a nephew who asked me to paint a mural in his toy room. I've always enjoyed coloring with colored pencils, draw different characters, cartoon characters, Looney Tunes, Flintstones. And when he requested a mural, I'm like, I don't even know how to paint. I mean, I can draw because he wanted a Disney mural. I can draw characters, not a problem. But I did not really know how to paint. So I decided to just kind of take a paint class at one of those craft stores. And the funny thing is, the whole purpose of me taking the class was to learn how to paint with acrylic paint on the wall. Because the class involved learning how to paint, there were different subjects you would be able to paint on canvas. One of the subjects I picked was the Eiffel Tower because I love Paris. I went ahead and painted the Eiffel Tower. And instead of painting one Eiffel Tower, I painted 5 different towers because each one had a different look, a different color, a different appearance. And then I ended up naming each one based on how I painted it. So for example, the one painting I made was Eiffel was Bonjour. Okay, the reason I called it Bonjour because during the day, the Eiffel Tower is gray and the painting resembled it like a daytime Eiffel Tower. At nighttime, when it's nighttime, the Eiffel Tower shines with light. The second painting I did, I called it Bonne Nuit, and I painted it gold because to me, it reminds me of nighttime. It's light. It shines the yellow light. Then I went on from there and painted 3 more. Patriotique. To me, I thought, well, I'm going to paint this Eiffel Tower looking like the French flag. And patriotique, we all know that means patriotic, kind of honoring the flag. So I made that one look like the flag of France. The fourth one, I kind of wanted to look festive, like I thought of Rio de Janeiro, you know, how they have Carnivale there, all the fun colors. So I made the fourth one all fun colors, and I called it Carnival. And then finally, the fifth one I wanted to do, I would think of Venice when they would have their Carnivale, but it was more like, you know, they're big with masks in Venice. And when I think of masks, I think of the black and white mask, you know, like a tragedy, comedy type of deal. So I made the final one black and white, and I called it Masquerade. I created these 5 Eiffels, and like I said, the whole reason I took the class was to learn how to paint for my, you know, nephew's mural. So I ended up with these paintings, and then at the end, you know, I finished his mural. I continued with the paint class, and then I thought, how cool would it be? I don't even know why this idea came to me, but I thought, well, what if I made these Eiffel Towers come to life and made them into little, like, cartoonish type of characters? And so that's what I did. So I started with designing different eye shapes. I started designing different, like, headpieces, designing how their arms would look, designing how they would actually look if they transformed from a painting into their little character. And I ended up with the 5 Eiffels. And from there, I wanted to create a storyline where they obviously live in the Louvre and they're hung as a painting and they come to life at night. But just because of my background with languages, I did want to incorporate languages in there because I thought it was so, as we say, apropos, it was so, appropriate to put it in there. And I wanted to incorporate the Romance languages because they're all based off of Latin. So I included the French, the Italian, and the Spanish. And then I also wanted to make it educational. So that's why I decided to put in there art and history and geography, because as the kids are reading, they're also learning. And I started out with my first book, which was The Five Eiffels, or Les Cinq Eiffel, The Five Eiffels. That was my first one. And then from there, I created the other two. And now I'm working on the fourth one, because they have to continue, obviously. If you read the first adventure, it kind of left you hanging, little cliffhanger there.
Absolutely.
And so now I'm working, right?
Yes.
Did that on purpose? So now I'm working on the fourth one. I'm finishing to writing that up, and then I have to go and do the drawings, because I do self-publish also too, Carolyn. So I self-publish all my books through my own company, Abruzzo Publishing. I do everything myself, from the drawing to the writing to the laying out the book, doing the graphic design. I am a one-woman show here.
One of the things that I love about this is the languages, but you have a glossary. As the child or the adult is reading the book, you come across a word, and then not only on the page is there the definition, but also in the back is an entire glossary. I love how you've included that, and it's not obtrusive. As you're reading it, it doesn't interrupt the flow of the story to have the glossary there. I mean, it's just a quick glance if you want to know what the word actually is as you're reading it.
Yes, and what's really neat too is you could even, if you choose not to really learn the word, you can still read it in English, because throughout the story, the definition of that particular word is right on the same page. As you're reading it, if you just want to do a read all in English, you can, which is neat. And then you can always go back and then reread it if you want to challenge yourself and say, maybe now I will try, the different languages. And of course, I did incorporate the glossary, because I think that it helps. Repetition helps to learn something you always want to repeat. I did the glossary at the back, because then once they're done with the story, they can always go to the glossary and look at the words again if they really want to learn some words in French, Italian, and Spanish. And then I have it broken up too on what language it is that they're learning. So, what word it is that they're learning, if it was a French word, Italian word, or a Spanish word.
And you also have about the Louvre in the back of the book too, a history of that, which I think is important for educating the kids about what this is. So it's not just a fairy tale magic land where they are, it's rooted in real life, and it gives the history of it.
Right. So in each book, depending on the book, obviously, in the Five Eiffels, I do towards the last, it's the last page before the glossary, I put a fact write-up on a particular geographical place or item or whichever. So, for example, in the Five Eiffels, I talk about the history of the Eiffel Tower. In the other book, The Beginning, I talk about the history of the Louvre, because it's based on the storyline. And then obviously in the first adventure, I talk about the gem. I don't know if I want to give that away. But,
yes.
Right. But in each one, I do talk about something that is historical and something that is educational. And it might be even something you didn't even know. So as you read through the book, you might have seen, I didn't know that. Maybe.
Actually, I knew about the diamond.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yes. As a child, going to see that and just being absolutely mesmerized. And I don't know if the Smithsonian has the story of it, or if back in school the teacher told us the story of it, but I just remember being so fascinated by that gem.
I did not know the story of it until I actually researched it. But I did want it included. Like, I didn't know the whole story of it. I just knew obviously what it's called today. And we actually had to drive out to DC to go take a picture of it so I can put it in my book. So that picture you see is the picture that we took. And then I was able to obviously then put the photograph in the book to talk about it. But I didn't know whatever we know now about that diamond, I did not know the history of it at all, or how it even got to the United States and how it even got to the Smithsonian. So that was great information and research that I actually learned myself.
I grew up right outside of DC, And every year
Okay.
for our school vacation or school trip, rather, we would go into DC. And so the Smithsonian, the Capitol, the White House, the Monument, those were all places that every single year we explored them. And I just have a fascination with history. So the Smithsonian was someplace that I loved to go. And when my children were little, I took them, but they're now in their late 30s and 40s. So it's been a while since I've been there. I have grandkids to take now.
Yes, you do. Absolutely. And now you can incorporate the book when you show them the gem.
Well, that's one of the things about this book that I really like is I like exposing my grandkids to other cultures and just nonfiction. Even though this is fanciful, it's still based on real things, such as the Eiffel Towers, the Louvre.
Yeah.
This really appealed to me when I saw it. And I would never have guessed that you were not a natural artist because your illustrations are over the top. They are just exquisite.
Really?
Oh, I
Wow.
love
Thank
them.
you.
I love it. It's
Really?
just beautiful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, those are all done in colored pencil. And it all started because I had a nephew that asked me, oh, can you paint me a Disney mural?
And how old was this nephew?
Well, he's only 10 now, so he was pretty young. I wouldn't doubt if my sister had a little say into it too and said, hey, because, she loves going to Disney World. Well, we all love going to Disney World, obviously.
You also have activity
Right,
sheets
right.
that the kids can color, which I think is really a nice touch.
Yeah, I have the activity sheets. They're free. And they're broken up by coloring pages and then by grade. Kindergarten, the 5 Eiffels, that's more for kindergarten, maybe up to second. And then if you're more of an advanced reader, I think in second up to 4th grade, I would say the beginning and the first adventure, because obviously it's a lot more words. And then I also have the different activity sheets. I have crossword puzzle. I have the word scrambler, and then I have just some quick activity sheet questions about characters and things about kind of like the languages. So it's fun. And then the coloring, I have a couple of characters that you would have to draw a couple of things in there if you took a look at that, and then get to color it in. So I tried to make it fun. I didn't want to put too much on there and get overwhelmed. I think that's great, and it's a free download, so you can't go wrong, right?
Absolutely not. It's perfect. Where can readers find your books?
So right now, the books are available on my website, the www.the5eiffels.com. That's where they're located right now. I do have some in independent bookstores in the Cleveland area. Probably the website would be the best place. I mean, unless you live in Cleveland. Fireside Bookshop, Topsy Turvy, Visible Voices, some independent bookstores.
When will the next book be released?
That I'm still working on that, because this is the thing, Carolyn. I wrote another series called the Chihuahua Venturous Children Book Series. We have these 2 Chihuahuas. Their names are Strawberry Nutella. So I decided to do it where it's more of like they learn kind of life lessons as Chihuahuas. And I already wrote the first one. It's already done, and I have to do the drawings. So I'm just trying to figure out, do I want to do colored pencil, or do I want to learn how to do digital? I'm not sure yet, but that one's already finished. That's just the drawing. And so I'm trying to work on that one. And that one's going to be for younger kids, like ages like 4 to 8 more so, because it's going to be a little lighter. And then the Lysenko Fell, the fourth book, that one I still have not finished writing. I'm halfway done.
No pressure.
I'll give you a little info of what's going on. So in that one, I have them in Venice, and that's all I'm going to tell you, because they're in Venice right now doing something in Venice, but then I'm kind of stuck.
Well, maybe our listeners can send you ideas.
Oh, that'd be great. Oh, and then how did you like how I rhymed the whole thing? That's the thing about my books, they all rhyme. Did you notice that?
I did notice that, and it is quite difficult for authors to successfully pull that off, and you managed to do that.
Wow, thank you, because I would even rhyme the foreign words. Did you notice that? Sometimes I would use the foreign word to rhyme with like an English word, and so I just like rhyming.
In the Lysenko Fell on
Yes.
I can't find the page number, but it says, but France is my home. And then you have it on me corazon.
Oh, yes. Right. I get that. Right. I rhyme with that one. That's in the first one in the Five Eiffel book. Yes.
Did I say that wrong?
No, you said it right.
But then you say, like in the one page, it ends with, it's where I'd like to be. And then you say, oui, oui. So I see how you've rhymed it throughout, which was really interesting. It's fun.
Yeah. And then what I also did, so did you notice on the one that you have when I sent you the books, I sent you Le Cinq Eiffel, the first adventure, and I sent you the first edition and the second edition?
Yes, I noticed that.
Okay. Yeah, so did you read both editions or did you just read the first edition?
No, I read both of them. And there's not much difference, though. Did I miss something?
You didn't notice the difference? Really?
Well, I noticed the artwork.
Well, I changed a little the artwork, but I also, with the first edition, there's a lot more foreign words than there is in the second edition.
I noticed was that you changed the color of the foreign words. So in this first edition, it's all black. It's just bolded.
Yeah.
But then in the second edition, it is in red. So it really stands out that it's a foreign word.
Yes, because I think it would be easier as you're reading through which word is foreign, and just to make it easier to the reader. And then I continued that, and I also changed a little the fonts, and then I continued that when I did the beginning, which is the Le Cinq Eiffel, the beginning. I made that similar to the second edition, and I changed a little on a couple of pages, some of the wording. Obviously you didn't really notice, so that's good.
I feel horrible as a host. I didn't research this enough. Sorry.
No, that's okay, because the reason I was mentioning it, because the first book that I wrote back in 2013, which is the Le Cinq Eiffel, the Five Eiffels, created a second edition. Totally changed the whole storyline. The pictures are the same, but I really changed, I don't want to say changed the whole storyline, but I added new lines and I changed things around a bit.
I noticed on your website under the shop that it said second edition coming. And I was confused because I thought, well, I'm looking at it right now, but I didn't realize you had updated it. Now it makes sense.
Yes, you have the first edition. When you look at the covers, I think with the second one I did, where they're kind of looking at the blue gem, I think pertains more to kind of what's happening than just putting a picture of the castle they're visiting.
And it also pops better. I love the purples and the blues, but the second edition cover, I think, it helps tell, like you just said, it helps tell the story. So I like that a lot. It's active.
Oh, good.
It's not passive. It's active.
Yeah, right. Where the castle's probably more passive. That's a great adjective. Yes. So in my art class, this is before I even did anything with the books or changing the Eiffel Tower paintings to characters, right? I love painting castles, and especially the castles in France in the Loire Valley. So when I came across a picture of this castle, which is a true castle, it's the Chateau du Sully-sur-Loire, which is obviously in France in the Loire Valley area, I decided to paint it. So I actually have a 16 by 20 inch painting of that castle. And what I decided to do when I did that book is we took a picture of it. I created it as a cover. So that's from a painting I did that I never thought I would use for anything. And I ended up using it for the first edition of that first adventure book. Isn't that funny?
It is. I love your imagination. That's one of the things, and I guess people who listen to the podcast are going to hear me say this every time I interview an author, but I just keep thinking, oh, you're so creative. You're so imaginative. And I'm a nonfiction writer. To read fiction and to see the creativity and the imagination and the magic behind these stories, I am just over the top impressed. And so, when I gush, it's truly, I'm impressed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's so kind. Thank you, Carolyn. You talk about imagination. What's funny is, in the beginning of my book, right on the copyright page, I always have a little intro there. And if you look at it, I always say right before I sign my name, I always say in every single book, always keep your imagination alive.
And I think that is so important for children. And as they grow older, we put so many constraints on them that sometimes the imagination just dies because they didn't draw the human body the way we wanted them to draw it. And I really, that makes me bristle when I hear teachers or parents or grandparents or adults tell children, oh, that's not the way it's supposed to be. Well, in that child's mind, that's exactly the way it's supposed to be. So let it be.
Right. I mean, art is so subjective, and I agree with you 100%. I mean, there's so many artists that draw, there's different type of art out there. So whatever the child thinks it should look like, you're right, let it be. Not everyone's going to be realistic, you know what I mean? Or, even in art, you don't have just realistic painters. Obviously, if you look at my paintings, they're not realistic at all. They're very whimsical. They're very maybe expressionist, expressionism. I don't know really what word to use, but I'm definitely not a realistic painter. I'll tell you that for sure. So
one of the characters in the first adventure that I really like is the blue bug. I think she is just adorable.
Oh, you do like her. Her name is Querella.
I couldn't pronounce it.
That's okay. Yeah, I know. In Italian, you have to roll those R's. You have to roll those R's. So it's funny because Querella, if you notice, she has a little heart on her chest. Yeah, because la cuore is the heart in Italian. And so how I made up her name is, because people might think, oh, that sounds like Cruella de Vil from Disney. Somebody brought that to my attention, and I thought, oh, that never even crossed my mind. Because, Cruella de Vil, right? So I thought, well, let's see. I had another name for her, actually. And I decided to name her, Querella, because cuore means heart in Italian. So if you take cuore and add the LLA, that's what makes her name, Querella. And that's how I came up with it. And, there's a reason for her heart to be there. It just has not been discovered yet, because obviously that will be revealed in the 4th book.
Another cliffhanger.
Yes, because you notice she has a heart on her chest, but why? Why is there a heart there, right? The shape of a heart. So, and another thing too, all my characters have magic. They're all magical. Did you pick up on that? How each one has a certain magic?
Yes, I did pick up on that.
Yeah, so each one has a certain magic. Certain things are magical on them. And so we will find out what magic Querella has in the 4th book.
Well, I am eager to read it.
Yes, I'm so glad. I'm glad you like the books, though. That's wonderful that you said that. That makes my day. It really does. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome. I will put links to your website and your social media in the show notes. But before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to tell our listeners?
Well, I think they should look into my books, obviously. Check out, we were going to talk about languages and how language is so important to a growing mind.
Yes, I forgot about that. Go right ahead.
Well, from what I've read, it's always good to learn languages at an early age because that sets you up as an adult. If you ever want to pick up another language, it'll be easy for you, because they say that it's difficult for adults to learn a language, but if you learn it as a young child, it is actually easier before the age of 7 to pick up other languages. If you're introducing your child to language at an early age, they actually say that it opens up different parts of the brains. I mean, do you know anything about this, Carolyn, where it improves memory? From what I've read, learning languages at a young age, it improves memory. It helps them stay more focused by learning other languages. And it just opens up different parts of the brains that if, say, you weren't learning a language, you might not have that. I think that learning a language can really help improve with memory. It can help improve a child maybe with focus. It can help improve them and learn about different cultures, which is so important nowadays. But even as an adult, they say that learning languages can actually slow down dementia. Did you hear about this or read it? I read about that. Did you know anything about that?
No, I haven't read about that, but I can tell you as a teacher, as a retired teacher, yes, I worked a lot with children who had learning differences. And one of the questions parents always would ask me is, why does my child have to take a foreign language to graduate when he or she barely can understand English, or,
Yeah,
they don't
I get
understand
that.
grammar? And in reality, kids with learning disabilities often excel in languages. As you said, it really taps into a different part of the brain. And as the kids become confident in learning a foreign language, it often helps them improve the English.
Yes, that actually is true. I did read that as well. When you learn a second language, it actually improves the first language that you're learning. That's so true. And it's interesting you say that, because I want to tell you one thing. When I was learning French, now it makes total sense, but then I didn't realize this. So when I was learning French, my Italian became so great. I'm like, what? Like, why am I speaking better Italian? It was the weirdest thing. I could never understand it, but there's truth to it. So as I'm learning French, my Italian was getting better. And it was like, I was remembering more words in Italian. I mean, I'm fluent in Italian, but like I said, if you don't use a language for a while, it's like you get a little rusty. It's like, wow, this is great. So yeah, there is truth to that. And that's a great fact to express, especially to parents, because I get that a lot. Parents will say to me, well, why do I want to buy your books? They barely know English. And that's a great, because it'll help with their English if they learn a second language. So, and that's a proven fact. So that's really good to know.
Yeah. One of the things that disappoints me is we don't teach children Latin anymore. And I think I had Latin as a freshman, and I think learning Latin is so important because it really helps with understanding the English language. Like, people will say the English language is so hard, but if you break it down and really understand root words and prefixes and suffixes and understand the Latin
Yep.
and the Greek origins and sometimes French, it really helps you understand the language. And to me, was one of my most fascinating classes.
That's interesting because, well, Latin is the root of a lot of languages. For example, Latin is the root of Italian, it's the root of Spanish, and the root of French. So the thing I found with those languages, because I know Italian, learning Spanish was very easy because Spanish and Italian are sister languages. They're just very, very close in speaking. So French, however, is a little different because a lot of the endings are cut off. They don't pronounce a lot of the endings in French. And however, you want to hear something funny. So in Italy, well, I'm sure this is in other countries as well, but in Italy, depending on what part of Italy you're from, you're going to speak a certain dialect. So you have your Italian, which is the true Italian, but then in certain regions of the country, you're going to have a dialect. For example, I'm Abruzzo, hence my company, Abruzzo Publishing. That's a region in Italy. And so I'm Abruzzese. Okay, so in Abruzzo, you're going to have different, they call them provinces or provincia. From where my dad and my mom are from, even though they're from different provinces, they're still under the Abruzzo region umbrella. So the dialect that my dad had and the dialect that my mom had were still different, even though they were still in the same region. But my dad had more of the dialect from Napoli, the Napolitan dialect. Now, the history of this is the reason I'm saying this, because the history of Napoli, it used to be once inhabited by French people. So obviously, I'm sure French words were probably taken back. You're talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So when I was learning the language French, oh my gosh, this word in French is my dialect in Italian. And I couldn't believe it. So there were words in French that in my Italian dialect was the Italian dialect. Does that make sense?
That's wild.
I was shocked. I was shocked. I'm like, wait a minute, that French word is our dialect. I'm like, wait a minute, is there French in us? So, that was really weird to find that out, just to find out about that, because I thought, oh my gosh, this is how we say it in our Italian dialect, but it's a French word. But then the real true Italian word. So you're going to have your Italian word and then your dialect. And our dialect, like I said, part of it was the French. So I thought that was crazy.
Well, look at the Spanish language.
I couldn't believe it.
You have the language in Spain, and then you have the Mexican Spanish. And look at the difference between British English and American English.
Spanish I use in my book is the Spanish of Spain. Their Z's are pronounced like a th. So in Mexico, they would say like a heart is called a corazón, because they say the Z. But in Spain, they would say corazón, thon. I use that in my books because that's from Spain.
Our second guest is Maureen Tenveir, also known as Mom at the Museum on Instagram. She will share with us how her bag of wonders has helped her children come to appreciate art and enjoy visiting museums around the world. Welcome, Maureen, to the Adventures with Grammy podcast. I think it is fascinating that you are not intimidated by taking your children to museums. How did this all come about?
Fun and just also kind of to inspire the moms that I know. I feel like museums are so underutilized by caregivers of young children, and people are so overwhelmed or daunted by museums. And I just kind of want to change that image. As you know, just in my circles, that was the whole idea. And I had started volunteering for the Smithsonian Institute as a gallery guide. Art was taking up a lot of my time. I was interested in it. And I just wanted to connect it to children because I left work some years back to be a full-time mom. And I love it. And I think I just kind of threw myself into being a mom and kind of I just wanted to share my passion, what I enjoy the most in, raising little human beings, just expanding minds.
Tell our listeners about your interest in combining art and early literacy.
I did some courses at the Smithsonian Early Learning Center, SEEK. I think the acronym is, it's housed in the Natural History Museum. So they offer some classes actually for educators. I think I used to be the only mom who used to attend these classes, but I was just so interested in early literacy and how art can be used or public places can be used to help children under 5 to kind of develop literacy. So I did that just because I enjoyed it and not necessarily for work, mostly just to kind of apply within my family. And then I just wanted to inspire, others as much as I could. I guess I didn't have any aspirations of having lots of followers. It's always nice. But the goal was just, I try and take my friends' kids and, neighbors and stuff. I've just tried to get more people involved.
Tell us some of the things that you learned from the Institute.
So one of the things is that I think I've always believed, but others have kind of laughed at me that babies understand. I think we don't give young children, babies enough credit. Like we just think they won't get it. Like even if you read to them or if you show them an artwork and talk to them about it, just thinking that it's a waste taking a baby to these spaces. So I think scientifically also they showed that children. Babies as young as few months can respond and recognize their brains respond to take children more seriously. I think that was the first thing. And then, that gave me the confidence that, I'm not just wasting my time or my children's time. I think it's valuable to them also. And, for me, becoming a stay-at-home mom was not easy. I mean, I worked for most of my adult life, and it can be very mind numbing, especially if I didn't have a lot of family. Most of my friends worked, so when I became a stay-at-home mom, it can be hard. And my husband travels. You don't talk to a grown-up for days. Sometimes it feels like so doing something with them, and you take them to the park and they have a good time. But going to a museum was intellectually stimulating for me. And I met other, like-minded moms or educators. And I felt like my kids are also taking away from that. So I think the first thing is to kind of give babies and children more credit as to how much they understand, how they respond. And I also feel the more you engage with them verbally, visually, the more they learn. I think the more their mind grows.
Is there anything else you would like to share with us that you learned at the Institute?
So one of the things that, I learned here at the museum, I would say, and then have applied. And I guess it applies to most of the age groups that, you can think of, babies or toddlers, is that you have to be a little bit more creative when trying to develop literacy or trying to develop their interest in art, and using tactile, if you're going, for instance, if you're going to go see an artwork, if you can keep something, for instance, if the artwork has lines, just keep like a piece of yarn in your bag. And once your baby or your toddler is in front of it, just hand them the yarn and kind of twist it. And when they can use their, as many senses as you can involve, you can use words or language around it, like, circle or wiggly or whatever. This tip of using more senses when dealing with children in a museum space really helped. And I think that really made my children's experiences more valuable or enjoyable. So simple things like that, or just keeping some crinkly paper or something shiny if the artwork was something like that, or something circular, so just think in terms of simple things like shapes or color or texture, and hand that over to your child when you're in the presence of artwork. And another thing that they always applied in their lessons that they would make was the use of singing. And I'm sure if I'm talking about early literacy, the idea of singing, bringing a poem, or making up silly poems or whatever, kind of also the really helps, and children, babies especially, respond to that.
How did you prepare your children to go to a museum?
So I know I've read a lot of blogs also that talk about this, and I never stressed about it. It was a very natural process, but like I said, like keeping a string, these things just they just are in my purse, or I have a huge bag, bag of wonders. I would have things like that. And because I was volunteering, I spent a lot of time at the museum, so maybe it was easier for me because I knew what to expect, right, in the museum, because I would go by myself also quite a bit. What I would suggest to somebody who wants to start doing this, so the first thing is, if you haven't been to the museum yourself previously and it's going to be the first time you're taking your children, one of the first things you can do is look at the website, because I feel museums, you were the region that you wanted to talk about in the Mid-Atlantic. This is a great place to live or visit if you're interested in visiting museums, because the museums here, some of the best in the world, and their education departments are. It's really interesting that the staff that works here are really educated, really passionate about the work, and the kind of resources the museums have on their websites and in person. Like most of the museums in DC, most of the Smithsonian museums, even some of the private ones like the Phillips Collection, have a dedicated education office, a room, a center, there's staff, and somebody's usually there all the time. And so if you haven't had a chance to kind of look at the website before you go, you can always go to the welcome desk. A lot of them have resources available at the desk, something like, certain activities. You can pick up a piece of paper that will give you certain activities that you can do with your child during the visit. They can highlight some artworks that have associated questions or games that you can play with your children while you look at those artworks. So honestly, like the museums here, at least in this region, are really welcoming of families and children, and have a lot of resources. If you don't have time on your own to kind of prepare before you go, kind of look at the website, kind of check out what kind of artwork there is, you can always walk in and ask for it or just look for it, and it's there.
That's good information for parents and grandparents to know. What has been your children's reactions to visiting the galleries and interacting with the art?
They've loved it. And one of the reasons can be that they've actually been going since they were several months old. And a lot of parents have concerns that, our children will break something or touch something. And a lot of museums also I've noticed, get uncomfortable, when you'll see the guard tense up when they see like 2 or 3 children walk in to the museum. You can see them suddenly becoming alert, and the body language makes you a little uncomfortable. But I think the more you take your children, the more they'll surprise you. That you just have to tell them, you have to use walking feet and indoor voices. This is all stuff that they also hear in school, and they'll recognize where they need to stop. But you have to do this a few times with them before you and the children can start relaxing and actually enjoying this space. And again, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, even New York, the museums there are very welcoming of children. I think the era that you grew up or I grew up in, the museums are very different now. They're I don't remember museums being such great fun places for children. But if you feel like, they need more space, a lot of these museums actually have dedicated rooms for children to play and touch and explore. There's that kind of space also if you feel like, okay, the gallery is getting a little overwhelming, or, it's too quiet and, my child's going to make noise. I can name several of the museums in DC that have dedicated spaces for children to come and explore the works in ways that are more appropriate for younger children.
Oh, please share those resources with us. As the grandmother to 6 little ones, I certainly would like to know where the most child-friendly museums are in DC.
One of our favorite spaces is the Smithsonian American Art Museum has a play area for children and also has an education room. And then it has the courtyard in the middle with that glass covered ceiling, and it has these water squirms on the floor that the children love running in and playing. And they're very welcoming of children. I remember when my oldest was young, it was a lovely place in the winter time to go because it's covered. It's indoors, but it's a glass ceiling, so you get sunlight. So I was working at that time, and I would come home from work, and she was just a baby, and I would take her, and I was nursing her, and I didn't realize it was time for the museum to shut down, and the guards were asking everyone to leave. And then the guard realized that I'm nursing, and he said, "Take your time." He said, "We'll wait for you. Take your time. There's no rush." And I thought that was just, they would have to stay slightly longer before they shut down, but they were nice enough to accommodate me. And so there's that museum that has its space. Then the American History Museum also has a wonderful Wegmans play area that's been sponsored by Wegmans. So it's basically around farm to food themed play area, starting from babies to young children. So there's that play area. Then, so the Hirshhorn have a learner's room, which is basically like a large open space where they hold weekly story times for children, and they'll bring out blocks and felt paper, felt pieces, and sticky stuff that kids can create artworks with. So they have weekly at certain timings when you have to go in, you can have access to these resources, but it's not a full-time dedicated space at the Hirshhorn. So these are the things that I can think of. These are the museums that I can think of that have dedicated spaces for children that you can enjoy. And then I've just been focusing on art museums, but then there's always the Natural History Museum, which is, I would say, my children's favorite, especially my son's, because he's so obsessed with dinosaurs and animals and everything. Fascinating. So they also have explorer rooms, which are amazing. I mean, forget my kids, I become a little child in there, because you can, look at all sorts of samples of fossils or gems or whatever your interest is. I mean, they're just really amazing and very hands-on experience. And they have like these microscopes, and there's always staff there to kind of help answer your questions or go exploring with. So just amazing. So that's also a very amazing resource.
I remember one picture I saw on your Instagram account, and it was your daughter sitting on the floor with, I suppose, paper and pencils, and she's drawing it. Was she trying to replicate the art she saw on the wall?
So yeah, this is a tip I can share that we always do. And again, I always have like a sketchbook, and not just for museums, even when we go for a walk. But in a museum, it's a particularly fun thing to do. It's to sketch what you see, because sometimes, especially with nonverbal children, very young children, they may not be able to describe what they see, and sometimes they just enjoy drawing. Like they can. And the thing is, what I find very interesting, sometimes I'll sit with my kids and I'll start sketching, and I realize I'm held back. Like I look at a sculpture or something, and I'll be overwhelmed by how complicated it is. But my daughter, like she's 3 or 4, and she'll very confidently draw like a Rodin, and she'll just get it because she just sees it. She's able to simplify it in her mind and sketch what she sees. She doesn't overthink it, right? I'll get overwhelmed by a sculpture, and I'll sometimes be intimidated that I can't sketch this. But kids are able to just sit there and copy, and they'll make something, and and then she can tell you. And it's interesting what are the details that they see or they notice or are important for them, and what they filter out. So so we do this sketching exercise as a way of looking, because sometimes if you look at an artwork, I think there's some research that says that usually when you go to a museum, and this is not for children, it's for grown-ups, but I'm sure it applies to kids who probably have shorter attention spans, is that normally you don't look at an artwork for more than like, I forget exactly how much it is, like 3 seconds or 5 seconds, and then you move on. But to develop the art of looking, to become more observant, developing visual literacy. So you have to, there are certain tricks you can use, and one of them is sketching, because if you give somebody a task that, can you sketch this, or can you draw what you find interesting, then you pause and then you look in a meaningful way, spend more time looking, and then there are different parts of your brain kick in, because then you look and then you're using your hands to sketch. So there's this that feedback loop that starts, and the wheels in your brain kind of start churning. So sketching, I find, is a very interesting way to develop more meaningful looking when you go to look at art.
I like that multi-sensory approach.
Right, exactly. So, again, back to that point of, as many senses as you can engage.
Tell our listeners about your children's favorite sculpture.
Smithsonian American Art Museum, it has some wonderful artworks, and they have this in the Lincoln Gallery on the second floor, I believe it is. They have this room for modern art, and there's this sculpture there, and I'm forgetting the name of the artist, of a woman who's sitting kind of, she obviously it's a sculpture. It's very realistic. So it looks like this woman is frozen and she's eating ice cream. And that was for the longest time, my children's favorite artwork in that museum. As soon as we'd enter, they're like, are we going to see that frozen lady having ice cream? They would just get such a kick out of looking at that woman. She's kind of like in mid bite, just sitting there, and very realistic looking. And, the first time they saw it, they couldn't figure out if she was real or if this is an artwork. We would quite often have ice cream once we would leave. There's all these shops nearby where we'd get some ice cream, just to kind of continue the conversation as to why she was stuck, or who was she, or, did she eat too much ice cream, or what did her ice cream taste like? Maybe that's why it was their favorite artwork, because we'd usually get ice cream after that visit. But it left a mark on them, right? They still remember it. I'm sure if you were to ask them, they'll tell you about it, that they would have noticed how much ice cream was in her bowl that she was having.
Eating ice cream after you leave the gallery is definitely a multisensory approach to appreciating art.
It's really worked for us, and I think it's made the whole outing very enjoyable when we can involve other senses other than just looking.
With young children, it's important to reinforce what they are learning. So how did you extend the art gallery lessons after you returned home?
So, there's different ways. For one thing, we've also bought a lot of books from the museum gift shops. I mean, that's another thing I absolutely love. I love museum gift shops. We end up spending more money than we intended to at gift shops. So they have such amazing things. But, we, for instance, bought a lot of storybooks that are written about artists or artworks, and these are geared towards young children. So we read a lot of books about some of their favorite artists. And so, at bedtime, if we'd seen a particular like Georgia O'Keeffe, just tonight when I was putting my daughter to sleep, we read A Splash of Red. It's about Horace Pippin, and his works are also at the Smithsonian Art Museum, and one at the Hirshhorn. It's not on view now, but they used to have one when we used to go for story time. So these are artworks they'd seen, and it really reinforced. I thought one of the things that really reinforced their memory of or understanding of an artist or an artwork is if you can follow up with a story that's connected with that. And, it's amazing how many books there are about artists or artworks, and how, well written they are, and how approachable they make it for children, how interesting they make it. That's really helped. That's one thing, if we can read a book that's related to that. And sometimes, it doesn't have to be a book that's directly about the artist or the artwork. It could be any storybook, if it can capture a certain emotion that we saw, or a certain, if you saw a particular artwork, there's certain works from Picasso that are in the East Wing of the National Gallery of Art that are, they're from his blue period. They're just sad works. And then, if you read a book about, a character being sad, they can always kind of connect it with that, what did you think of the colors, or, something like that. Sometimes we read books actually in the museum also. That's another thing that we've done. And the Hirshhorn is great that way. They actually, on weekends, have a station where you can check out a bag that will have a few books that you can just borrow, and they'll give you tips. The bag will also have tips that, this book is very nice to read with this artwork that's on view. And so you can go sit in front of, and these are not books that are about the artwork or the artist. This is just a general story. They're connected somehow with the artwork, and the museum does the work for you. They'll make suggestions that this would be a nice artwork to read this book with. You can go read the book and then kind of connect it with the artwork.
I am impressed that museums are doing this and making art so accessible to young children.
The museums are closed. We can't wait for them to reopen in DC. But once they do, I would highly encourage you to check out all the educational programs that these museums are running. It's beyond fascinating. And the amazing thing about the Smithsonian is that they're free. And most of the programs that they offer, if not all, are free and open to public.
Is there any advice or caution you would like to share with listeners?
When you're visiting a museum with children, especially young children, you have to be careful not to overwhelm them. When we live in a city, when we live in DC, I never would go with the goal of seeing the whole museum with them, or even, more than just a few artworks, because there's just so much that they can enjoy and take in. Now, when you have the luxury of living in the city, and especially when the museum is free, you don't feel the pressure to kind of pack in as much as you can. So when we would visit New York, there would be a bit of that compulsion, right? Because these museums are not free, especially if you don't live in New York, right? And they're not trivial. I mean, I remember spending close to $100 for a family of 5. To visit the Met. And then when you go, you're like, okay, let's just check this gallery also. Let's just a little bit more. So I felt like I was pushing the kids to do more than what their stamina was. So, but you have to be very careful, right? You don't want to overwhelm them. You don't want to tire them out so that they never want to come back to a museum again. So that's just a caveat. Do your research, choose a few galleries that you think meet whatever your children's interests are. Maybe just go to the front desk and ask them, what is the shortest route from this gallery to that? Because there's a lot of walking also involved in museums that are that big, and kids get tired and hungry and sometimes feel the pressure because you've paid the ticket. You kind of want to make the most from your trip, but it can sometimes backfire.
What is your favorite museum throughout the world? Like, what is your number one museum?
I really thought about this question because it's like asking to choose one of who's your favorite kid, Now, if I really had to, I'll choose the Hirshhorn because it was in DC. I was volunteering there. I have some wonderful friends there. But more than that, I really find the artworks that they bring, the artists that they bring, just amazing. The reason why I personally enjoy contemporary art is because, when I would go to the National Gallery of Art, it has a more permanent collection. It doesn't change as often. I mean, they have certain exhibitions that change, but they have a very large permanent collection. And, these are artists that are well established, others in history has declared them masters or masterpieces, and you kind of have to like them, right? You're like, okay, how can I say Van Gogh is not good or Rembrandt isn't good? You kind of don't get to exercise your own judgment as much. And I think there's so much baggage also that comes, good and bad baggage that comes with a lot of these artworks. But with contemporary art, I feel like who knows, in 20 years, this artist might be in oblivion. I am free to choose or decide what I think of this artwork, whether I like it or I don't. I also find it very interesting what contemporary artists are doing with art, right? They're pushing the boundaries. I'm just blown away by how, like, for instance, technology is being incorporated or the kind of concepts. And I find conceptual art really something that I literally feel like my mind expands if I come across something that I like. It's ideas, it's not just paint and canvas anymore, but there's value in an idea. I just enjoy seeing the boundaries of art being pushed. So I think that's why I really like the Hirshhorn, because I think it's a leader when it comes to contemporary art. And, they're also very representative. I feel like compared to some other museums, you must have followed this debate about how museums they need to be more inclusive and they need to be more diverse. And I think the Hirshhorn does a good job of that. But I feel like I get exposed to like a wider range of artists and artworks.
I hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Adventures with Grammy podcast. You will find the links to our guests and the topics we discussed in this episode's show notes. If you would like to be a guest, or if you know someone who would be an awesome guest, please connect with me at carolyn@adventureswithgrammy.com.